And we welcome you into Game Day Scoreboard as Game 2 of the NLCS kicked the day off, and the night concludes with Game 1 of the ALCS and an AFC East showdown between the Bills and Jets. But Monday Night Football wasn't the only big news coming out of the NFL on Monday. Well, it was bad news for the Detroit Lions as they're still reeling after star defensive end Aidan Hutchinson suffered a broke tibia and fibula in the third quarter of the Lions' win over the Cowboys on Sunday. Hutchinson successfully underwent surgery and is estimated to be out for the next 4 to 6 months. Here's what Dan Campbell had to say about what he expects from Hutchinson in his road to recovery.
It hurts. It hurts to lose somebody like him, not only the player, but the person that's in that locker room, the leader that he is. It's 4 to 6 months. I would never count Hutch out, ever. So, yeah, probably, long road, but I would never count him out. And I would say if anybody can make it back, it'd be him.
Never count Hutch out. You know who else we can't count out? CBS Sports NFL writer John Breech here to break down a busy news day across football. And we begin things with the big news coming out of Detroit. That's their best defensive player now out for essentially the season with a broken tibia and fibula. But let's take a step back and just look at this NFC North as a whole. Hutchinson's injury, perhaps maybe one of the most impactful non-quarterback injuries. And considering how all 4 teams are trending upwards, I'm looking at the Vikings, Bears, Packers, and Lions. How does this injury impact Detroit and their chase for the North?
Well, yeah, I think it absolutely impacts their ability to win this division. I mean, you're looking at their big Week 7 game against the Vikings. If you're Sam Darnold, you're worried about that pass rush, and you're worried about the fact that Aidan Hutchinson leads the NFL in sacks. But now that he's not going to be there, that's going to make things a little bit easier for that Vikings offense. And you kind of look around at the other teams that the Lions still have to play in the division. You still play the Packers twice. Same thing there, where you just don't have to deal with that Lions pass rush that is just not going to be as good as it was with Hutchinson. And so there's no easy way to replace him either. So I think that's another issue you have to worry about if you're the Lions. The trade deadline is 3 weeks from Tuesday. Maybe you call around and see if you can find someone. But I do think that this definitely puts the Lions behind the 8 ball. If they were the favorites before the season, now that they're a game behind the Vikings without Hutchinson, it feels like the Vikings are probably the favorite to win the division now.
Yeah, that trade deadline you talk about November 5th. So if Detroit wants to do something might be happening sooner rather than later. But in other notable injury news, Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel confirming earlier on Monday that Tua Tagovailoa is expected to play again at some point this season. Tua, he's been out since September 12th after suffering a concussion against the Bills in Week 2. That's the 3rd of his career. Tua will be eligible to come off IR and resume practicing on October 23rd. So, John, with Tua poised to return at some point this season, I mean, is that enough to right the ship for this struggling, I think it's fair to say, Dolphins offense, or do you think maybe this is a little too late at this point?
Well, I think it's interesting because this kind of creates a dilemma. This is obviously the first time we've heard the Dolphins publicly acknowledge that Tua is going to play again this season. And when you look at the schedule, you look at where this team is headed, Tua has to miss one more game because he's on injured reserve, so he obviously can't play in Week 7. The earliest he can play is Week 8 against the Cardinals. Now, is that too early? That's only a month and a half since his injury. But if you don't play him there and you start looking towards, say, mid-November, say Week 11 or Week 12, well, there's a good chance the Dolphins aren't going to be in the playoff race at that point if they're playing their backup quarterbacks. And now if they're not in the playoff race, do you really want to risk Tua's health putting him out there for games that don't matter? So I do think that the Dolphins are kind of a dilemma because you want him out there sooner rather than later so that he can save your season. So I have to think they're going to try and look to get him out there somewhere between weeks 8 and 10 so that they can still get back in the playoff race.
Well, how about over in Cleveland, where they also have quarterback issues, but it's just not necessarily in the health department? Deshaun Watson coming off another lackluster performance in Cleveland's 20-16 loss to the Eagles in Week 6, now dropping to 1-5 on the season. Kevin Stefanski reiterating that Deshaun Watson still gives them the best chance to win. But, John, I got to ask you, does Stefanski have a point, or is it maybe time to give maybe Jameis a chance in Cleveland?
I mean, if the guy who gives you your best chance to win is someone who hasn't thrown for 200 yards in a single game this season, is that you just giving up on the season saying we don't have a chance to win? I mean, everyone's frustrated in Cleveland. You can see Browns fans are frustrated. The players look frustrated on the field. And it just looks like there's kind of this tension mounting that almost might force Stefanski to make a move because Deshaun Watson just hasn't been able to do anything. Now, the Browns do get Nick Chubb back in the next week, maybe week 7, maybe week 8, but he is going to be on the field soon. So maybe that's something you're looking forward to. We get our star running back. That's going to help Deshaun Watson. Maybe that will make the offense better. But I think if you're the Browns, you look at their upcoming schedule. They have the Bengals. They have the Ravens in the next 2 weeks. I think you let Deshaun Watson ride that out because, hey, he played well against the Ravens last year. The Browns have played well against the Bengals historically. So if you win one of those 2 games, it feels like your season's still alive. But if you lose both of them, you bench Watson, you put Jameis Winston in there. And I do think the one issue, though, is if you bench Watson, there's no going back to him. That's pulling the plug on the Deshaun Watson experiment. And that might be why they're so hesitant to do it. But I do think you give Watson maybe a week or 2 more, and then if he doesn't turn it around, go to Jameis.
That's making a big statement, and you bring up a great point because once you bench him, there is no looking back. And we know what brought us to this point right here. All right, over in Indianapolis, Colts, they've been thriving as of late with the guy that once came off his mom's couch and was, making it to the postseason. But quarterback Joe Flacco now at the helm. He's won 2 of his 3 appearances since Anthony Richardson's oblique injury in week 4. But head coach Shane Steichen planning to stick with Richardson as a starting QB, bearing any setbacks. But is this still the right move for Indy? Or is there a case to maybe stick with Flacco as QB1?
Well, I think the wins and loss column says there's a case to stick with Joe Flacco. He won on Sunday. He's now 2-1. He's throwing multiple touchdown passes in each of those starts. And look, it's the NFL. Winning games is tough. I'm sticking with the hot hand. Yes, I know that you have a high first-round draft pick sitting there waiting. He needs to develop. He needs to play. But if he's not 100% healthy, there's no reason you can't stick with Joe Flacco for another week or 2 until the wheels fall off the wagon, which usually happens at some point with Joe Flacco. If I was Shane Steichen, I wouldn't have said anything today. I think there could have been something with gamemanship where you just don't announce a starting quarterback. Anthony Richardson and Joe Flacco have 2 skill sets that are so far apart, it's almost impossible to believe it's the same sport. You're talking about super mobile Anthony Richardson, then you have Flacco sitting back there in the pocket. He's not mobile at all. So I would have just waited till Friday or Saturday, maybe even Sunday like they did in week 6. So I think going with Anthony Richardson is probably the right decision because you have to develop him. But I think the Colts feel very good knowing that they have Joe Flacco waiting in the wings if Richardson isn't able to finish the game.
It's really interesting because the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, things sure looking like they're working with Joe Flacco, especially with his 2 receivers and Pittman and Downs. But hey, like you said, still developing Anthony Richardson. And if he's your QB1, you want to make sure that that is known. That's CBS Sports NFL writer John Breech on all the latest in the NFL. Thanks, John. And CBS has 5 monster games on tap this Sunday. Titans looking to find their way back in the win column, traveling to Buffalo to take on the Bills. Bengals and Browns go head-to-head in an AFC North showdown. C.J. Stroud and Jordan Love going toe-to-toe. Raiders and Rams both in need of bounce-back wins. And the Commanders host the Panthers. Watch live or stream on Paramount Plus. And tune in to HQ for highlights, post-game reaction.